It's been a bit of a shock. However much one tries to prepare oneself for something like this, it's still a dreadful shock, and we're sort of trying to come to terms with that, and it's very, very sad.
Prince Edward, the most reserved member of the royal family, just sent shockwaves across the UK, and people everywhere are still trying to process it. During a deeply emotional interview, Edward revealed decades of personal struggles that have shaped his life behind the palace walls. For the very first time, he opened up about the lingering wounds caused by constant comparisons to his brother, exposing how the pressure left lasting marks on both his childhood and adult life. The big question now is, what finally pushed him to speak out, and how did the royal family react to his bold and unexpected honesty? Join us as we dive inside the private moments that reshaped everything for Prince Edward's dilemma. The royal family has had its share of troublemakers, but Edward was never one of them. People long described him as the calmest, most reserved member of the British royal household. Yet, when he finally made a shocking revelation, it hit the public like a cold splash of water straight to the face. It was sudden, almost surreal, to see the prince who had maintained a reputation for decades of composure finally crack open his heart. For the first time, he allowed the world to glimpse just how much the past few years had drained him. His admission was not dramatized. It was raw, simple, and that made it hit even harder. Viewers later admitted it felt like witnessing a man step out of a long, self-imposed shadow. The public's reaction to Prince Edward's revelation came fast and fierce. People who had barely noticed him before suddenly saw the sadness that had always lurked behind his polite smile. And what they discovered stunned everyone. Fans and critics alike dug up old footage of Edward at state events, charity galas, and family gatherings. Comparisons were immediate. The Edward people had watched for years seemed different from the one speaking so openly now. There was a fresh, quiet sadness in his eyes, and it made the public realize just how invisible he had been for most of his life. His role had always been supportive and calm, absorbing others' storms. Seeing him tremble ever so slightly drew waves of sympathy across the country. So what was going on with Edward? The youngest child of the royal family, rarely at the centre of attention, he followed in his brother's footsteps to Gordonstoun and later studied history at Cambridge. Still, the public rarely linked him to any major royal crises. He was the dependable one. Never a scandal, never a headline, never demanding the spotlight. Some experts even called him the family's quiet engine, always present, always running, but not loud or flashy. While the world focused on the bigger, flashier personalities of the household, it's now clear something had been brewing inside Edward. Though he continued to perform his duties with his usual energy, his posture, his presence, carried a subtle shift, hinting at a deeper, hidden struggle. Sources close to Edward reveal that he has been worried about Queen Elizabeth II. He grew up watching her weather the storms of rulership with unshakable strength. As her closest child, he admired her unmatched dedication. Over her decades-long reign, she carried out more than 15,000 official engagements, tirelessly leading into her 90s. And Edward tried to mirror her unwavering commitment. He admired her consistency as a personal model of strength. But the harder he tried to emulate her firmness, the more that strength pressed down on him like an invisible weight. Edward had promised himself he would quietly hold the family together in whatever way he could, trying to honour her example every day. After her passing, that promise became a silent vow. On the day she died, the United Kingdom entered over 10 days of mourning, with nearly 250,000 people queued to pay respects at her lying in state. Edward sought to match her calm, her devotion, and her sense of duty. Yet every month that passed after her death reminded him just how heavy that responsibility truly was. The weight settled deep into his bones. He would wake each day with the nagging feeling that something precious was slipping away, and he had no clear way to stop it. But that wasn't all. The unity Queen Elizabeth had fostered for decades began to crumble in her absence. It started subtly: fewer family photos, fewer public appearances together, less communication between different family branches. Palace insiders confirmed the warmth that once filled every room when she walked in was gone. Every minor disagreement felt bigger, every rift grew wider, and Edward watched the tension rise between Charles, himself, William, and Harry. What had once been minor and manageable disagreements now felt serious and heavy, simmering just beneath the surface. Debates over the monarchy's future added even more pressure. The fallout between William and Harry still rippled around the globe, with surveys showing the public's trust in the brothers' relationship is waning. Edward's own struggles were no small matter. They affected not only public perception, but also the emotional bonds holding the family together. Meanwhile, Charles battled his own storms, trying to steer the monarchy during a period of shrinking active royals and growing demand for transparency. Each member faced a personal hurricane, and each storm added weight to the tense atmosphere Edward navigated daily. He absorbed it all in silence, refusing to argue or choose sides. He simply carried the load, letting the weight build inside him. Behind closed doors, arrivals were carefully timed, conversations tightly controlled, and every gesture calculated. The palace, once a home, now felt like a museum, silent and tense, where every movement mattered. The emotional distance, the quiet coldness, became the part Edward struggled with the most. It wasn't a public scandal or headline-grabbing crisis. No, the deepest cuts came from the private atmosphere inside the palace. Edward moved through rooms where echoes of laughter still lingered, yet the air felt thick with tension and unspoken pressures. He would glance at portraits of the Queen and feel a strange mix of comfort and heavy expectation. He thought of her calm, her unwavering steadiness, and her uncanny ability to bring people together, and he wondered why, no matter what he did, he could not recreate that same sense of harmony. That quiet, gnawing question became the seed of his slow breaking point. The more he tried to emulate her steadiness, the closer he drifted to the edge of his patience. This was never an explosive public collapse. It was a subtle, grinding shift inside him, unnoticed by most. But what few realized is that Edward's current struggles didn't appear out of nowhere. They were rooted deeply in his life story. Let's rewind to the beginning, back to the early years that shaped him. Stay with us, because this is just the start. Prince Edward's childhood and upbringing reveal the pressures that quietly carved him. From the start, Edward was the quiet child in the household. Charles was the heir, watched by the world. Anne had a confidence that filled every room effortlessly, grabbing attention wherever she went. Edward drew notice without even trying. Very early on, he realized he was different. He didn't compete for space. Instead, he preferred to sit back, watch and listen as the world whirled around him. People often mistook that for shyness, but it was a deeper sensitivity, one he never learned to hide. He noticed details others ignored, the small ways a person shifted when uncomfortable, the weariness etched into the staff after long days, or the subtle weight his mother carried beneath her crown. He memorized moods and silences, remembering little details no one expected him to catch. These habits shaped him into a natural observer and quietly nudged him toward a life of careful attention. His closeness to the Queen grew naturally because she saw the quiet strength within him. She understood that he was not built like the others. Even when he stayed silent, her presence offered comfort and clarity. When life in the palace felt heavy with expectation, he would stay near her because she made the room breathe easier. Edward later shared in an interview that Queen Elizabeth once told him she knew he saw the world differently. Her words were meant as encouragement. But even as a child, Edward sensed that this unique vision could be both a blessing and a burden. As he grew, the question of where he fit into the royal hierarchy became impossible to ignore. The structure of the family was clear. Charles was the future, and Anne had already carved out her strong identity. Edward, by contrast, often felt like the extra piece in a set that was already complete. He didn't want to compete with them. He simply wanted to find his own lane, a role that matched his vision of life. But defining that path was harder than most realized. These struggles were subtle but constant, never dramatic, always simmering just beneath the surface. He joined the Royal Marines in his early 20s, but left training after 4 months. Critics were quick to pounce, newspapers calling him out for lacking stamina. And if you think that was the end of it, wait until you hear his next steps. A few years later, he launched into television production with Ardent, which became fodder for British media jokes. Programmes didn't always pull in strong ratings, and one project even filmed near Prince William at university, against palace guidance. Every misstep was amplified simply because of who he was. Headlines chipped away at his confidence. He tried to move forward, but the subtle bruises of public scrutiny settled quietly inside him, shaping how he measured himself. Then came Sophie. Meeting her changed his life in ways he never expected. She understood his gentle nature and offered him something rare: emotional safety. She didn't treat him like a background figure. She treated him like a man deserving of respect and space. In 1999, their wedding was watched by over 200 million people worldwide. But Edward felt grounded that day because she was by his side. With Sophie, he finally had someone who saw him fully, who held him in a way the public never could. Together, they worked on charities, quietly making meaningful contributions without the glare of global attention. People noticed the difference. Edward's relaxed nature around Sophie contrasted sharply with the constant tension elsewhere. Even his siblings remarked on the change. It was as if the softer parts of him finally had room to breathe. Yet, even with Sophie, comparisons never ended. Charles continued his high-profile duties, performing hundreds of engagements over the years, while Edward remained under the watchful eye of public scrutiny. Edward sat quietly, absorbing the spotlight on his family, hoping the world would one day see him as more than a spare sibling lurking in the shadows. The insecurity never dominated his life, but it lingered, especially when cameras zoomed in or critics drew unfair comparisons between him and his brothers. He longed for the world to understand that quieter family members carry their own responsibilities and contributions, often unseen. Then the unthinkable happened, leaving him shaken to the core: the death of Queen Elizabeth. According to palace sources, her passing reopened every old insecurity at once. She had been the one person who truly understood his gentleness, not as weakness, but as a natural part of who he was. Losing her was like losing the only anchor that had kept him steady all these years. Since childhood, Edward had witnessed moments that would stay with him forever, but nothing prepared him for the overwhelming spectacle of the funeral, watched by more than 4 billion people across the globe. For Edward, standing beside his grieving siblings, the weight was almost too much to bear. His grief wasn't only about losing the Queen, it was about losing a part of his own identity, a sense of stability he had relied on for decades. He felt her absence more profoundly than he ever expected. Without her, the palace felt strange, hollow and unfamiliar. He felt vulnerable in ways he hadn't for years. Something he had long buried, something quietly lodged deep in his emotions, began forcing its way to the surface. Once again, the emotional cost of life inside the monarchy, the one he had learned to swallow since childhood, returned with full force. This time, he couldn't push it away. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was the immense, relentless pressure of decades of expectation finally reaching a boiling point. Recently, during a high-stakes family meeting, Edward would do something that shocked everyone and shifted the royal family's dynamics forever. Stay with us as we reveal the truth. King Charles had called the meeting. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, only a quiet room lined with polished wood and worn carpet. The scent instantly familiar to Edward after countless hours walking those same corridors as a young prince, observing, thinking, silently calculating. The stakes were high, and Edward could feel it in every fibre of his being. Public concern had been mounting, and the royal family needed to appear united, yet the atmosphere was thick with tension, and Edward felt it settle on him even before a word was spoken. When Charles finally spoke, he emphasized alignment, discipline, and the need to present a flawless image to the world. Unity was the mantra, and every phrase reminded Edward of how the family had been trained to prioritize appearances over genuine connection. When William spoke, he echoed almost everything Charles had said, doubling down on perfection, control, and restraint. Edward listened, noting how every carefully measured word underlined a family culture that valued image above emotional truth. Harry was absent, though no one mentioned it outright. Edward felt the gap immediately. The missing presence of his brother hung in the air like an empty space at a dinner table. Every word about family unity felt hollow, amplified by that absence, stirring a deep unease in Edward. And then came the moment that would finally crack his careful composure. Charles stated, calmly and without inflection, that some royal relationships were beyond repair. The words struck Edward like a physical blow, shifting the very atmosphere in the room. He had endured quiet inner storms for years, but this felt different. A declaration from the head of the family that some bonds were no longer worth protecting, no longer worth nurturing. In that moment, Edward felt a sudden, urgent need to respond. and what he said next would leave the entire family stunned. He spoke of emotional honesty, demanding that feelings be recognized instead of buried under the pursuit of perfection. He criticized the family's obsession with appearances, revealing how it often came at the cost of real human connection. For the first time, Edward openly challenged the family structure, confronting the cold rigidity that had governed their interactions for decades. Those present couldn't hide their reactions. Charles's eyes widened, wild with surprise. William stiffened, rigid, his control visibly shaken. Camilla looked away, momentarily unsure of how to respond to this unprecedented breach of protocol. Edward continued, describing the hidden emotional cost of life behind the palace walls, acting perfect while feeling drained and fractured inside. He spoke of times when he watched the family fracture silently, longing for warmth and closeness that always seemed just out of reach. When he finished, the room was silent, faces frozen in shock. Even Charles, who usually commanded every room effortlessly, appeared unmoored. William, so proud of his composure, could only stare. Camilla was lost, yet did her best to look away. Edward realized he hadn't intended to shock so deeply, but the truth had been too long buried and demanded to be voiced. He left the room, wandering the familiar corridors in a daze, barely noticing staff moving quietly about their duties. His mind was full. The tension, the challenge, the weight of speaking truth in a place where truth was rarely allowed. He felt both liberated and terrified. Speaking had lightened his heart, yet it had exposed a fracture he couldn't yet repair. Then, Edward noticed something that would change the story. He stood by the door of a quiet room and saw a letter on a desk. Thick paper, precise, deliberate handwriting, unmistakably the Queen's. He had seen her letters before, usually formal, dignified, and distant, but this one was different. It was deeply personal, addressed not to a royal role, but to the man she had known all his life. As he read, Edward felt her presence wrap around him. The letter spoke of the importance of protecting the heart of the family, emphasizing that unity was not just about appearances or public image, but about genuine emotional connection, about truly seeing each other, even when it was hard. She reminded him that strength was not only measured in composure or perfection, but in understanding empathy and having the courage to speak and act with honesty. Edward paused, reading her words slowly, letting each sentence sink in. He felt a deep reassurance. The Queen had trusted him to carry something vital within the family, a weight both daunting and sacred. Her message confirmed that the responsibility of keeping the family emotionally intact now rested partly on his shoulders. The quiet, sensitive, observant self he had cultivated over decades was not a weakness, but an essential necessity, a tool the family desperately needed. The letter acknowledged the complexities, the fractures, and the emotional distance that had grown among his siblings, and it encouraged him to become a bridge, a presence that could nurture and heal where others had become rigid, distracted, or consumed by appearances. Edward lingered over every word, realizing the magnitude of what she was asking him to do. It was not a simple task, nor a one-time effort, but a mission that would require patience, resilience, courage, and constant attention. He reflected on his confrontation with the family earlier, understanding that the words he had risked speaking aloud were only the beginning. Protecting the heart of the family was a continuous act, demanding careful balance, keen observation, and emotional intelligence, but the Queen's letter provided a quiet, undeniable direction that filled him with resolve. The fallout from the meeting had exposed cracks, tensions, and absences that could no longer be ignored. Edward's voice had broken a decades-long silence, and now, reinforced by the Queen's words, he felt an even greater sense of purpose. Slipping the letter carefully into his pocket, he made a decision that would shock the nation and alter public perception of the monarchy forever. His confession was coming, and it would reveal truths, emotions, and vulnerabilities never spoken before. In a recent documentary celebrating Queen Elizabeth's life, Prince Andrew dropped a bombshell that rocked the British public. But Edward was about to share a confession of his own. On the day of the interview, Edward walked into the studio composed, projecting an air of calm confidence. Yet Sophie immediately noticed the tension clinging to him like a second skin, subtle but undeniable. She reached for his hand in quiet reassurance, and he nodded, faintly grateful, bracing himself for what he was about to reveal to the world. Every step he took toward the cameras carried the weight of decades of observation, restraint, and silent duty. The cameras rolled. Lights flickered softly across the studio. The crew moved quietly, creating an environment meant to celebrate the Queen's legacy. Yet Edward had a deeper purpose. He would speak not only about her achievements, but also about the emotional bonds she had entrusted him to safeguard. The conversation began lightly, with familiar questions about her public accomplishments. Edward answered politely, carefully, his voice steady, but tinged with the strain of long-suppressed feelings. Anyone paying close attention could sense the quiet tension beneath his words. Then came a simple question, seemingly innocent, about her personal life, her moments away from the public eye. Edward paused. He took a measured breath. His gaze shifted slightly, recalling private memories that were both tender and profound. And then, in that moment of quiet pause, Edward dropped the bombshell. He spoke of a private conversation shared with the Queen near the end of her life, an intimate moment in which she allowed her family to see not only her hopes, but also her fears and deeply held wishes. She had entrusted him to carry something forward, to ensure that the emotional connection between her children, her grandchildren, and the family as a whole remained intact. This was a duty beyond public appearances, a responsibility to safeguard the heart of the monarchy itself. She had tasked him with guarding the family's heart, not merely its image, a weighty responsibility that demanded vigilance, patience, and courage. As Edward read aloud the Queen's words, decades of restrained emotion surfaced all at once. He admitted, with raw honesty, that he had sometimes felt he had failed in that promise. Tears formed at the corners of his eyes, unbidden and unstoppable, tracing paths down his face. He spoke of fractures within the family, of unspoken pressures, of wounds inflicted silently over years. Edward confessed a profound regret, a longing for the warmth, connection, and closeness that had once defined his family life but had slowly drifted away under the weight of duty. He recalled quiet evenings in his childhood, moments spent with the Queen as she shared stories, wisdom, and lessons in patience, understanding, and leadership. He remembered watching his siblings grow under the unrelenting scrutiny of public attention, seeing them navigate triumph and disappointment while he remained in the background, observing, supporting, feeling both admiration and isolation. He spoke of the moments when laughter might have lightened burdens, when candid conversations could have bridged distance, when emotional honesty might have healed old wounds. But these moments rarely came. His words moved from quiet reflection into a moment of revelation, exposing truths long hidden behind palace walls. Edward revealed that the monarchy had sometimes relied too heavily on perfection and polished appearances, that perhaps it was time to embrace humanity more fully. The public expected flawless displays of composure, dignity, and unflappable poise. Yet Edward suggested that real courage, value, and strength existed in vulnerability, in acknowledging imperfections, and in allowing honesty to coexist with duty and tradition. His confession was a declaration that emotional openness was not weakness, but a critical part of leadership and legacy. He shared a vision for the future, intimate, personal, and relational. A monarchy where bonds mattered more than optics, where voices could be heard without fear of judgment, where emotional honesty could coexist with centuries-old tradition. He acknowledged he had not yet fully succeeded, but the act of confessing, of speaking truth, was itself a bridge toward repair, understanding, and the slow reclamation of family warmth and trust. As the cameras captured every word, Edward allowed himself to breathe, to feel the weight of decades of restraint lift, even slightly. Sophie squeezed his hand gently, offering quiet reassurance, and the studio remained hushed, listening to a prince speak with humanity, emotion, and courage. His words resonated far beyond the studio, touching viewers who had never imagined seeing a royal so unguarded, so authentically human. The interview concluded, but Edward's confession lingered in the hearts of viewers, marking a turning point, not only for him, but for how the monarchy itself was perceived. The nation had witnessed a prince stripped of pretense, grappling openly with regret, longing, and hope. He demonstrated that vulnerability was not weakness, that imperfection could coexist with duty, and that humanity mattered as much as tradition. This was the start of a new chapter, a moment of reckoning and clarity, shaping his path forward and perhaps, in time, influencing the family he had vowed to protect quietly. After the cameras stopped rolling, Edward sensed a subtle shift. The confession had not healed all fractures nor erased decades of old wounds, but it had created space for truth, dialogue, and authentic connection. The journey ahead remained challenging. The family storm still raged quietly behind palace doors. Yet, for the first time in decades, he had spoken, and the burden on his mind began to lift. Thank you for staying with us. Do you think Edward was right to confront King Charles? Share your opinions in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.